Hello everyone, my name is Pooper and welcome to yet another beautiful Factorio base tour. This time I am showcasing a map that I've been working on for the last 6 months since the 0.15 patch release date back on April 24th. Since then I've spent over 280 hours of gameplay on this map alone, but I am finally pleased with my base, so let's go ahead and take a look. So before we get too much further, let's go ahead and zoom out so that we can see the base in its entirety. As you can tell, it is a pretty large, symmetrical, diamond-shaped base, which was something that I went for from the very beginning because I wanted to be a little bit more creative than other bases I've seen in the past. Zooming out even further, you can see just how massive and extensive the base goes, in particular with the farming stations that I have surrounding the perimeter of our most outer wall here. The farming stations are mostly composed of bot miners at this point, which is why you see a lot of these blinking lights, which indicate that we have full storage in each of these mining sections. We have several miners on each patch with a couple robotic bays and then storage that is then supplied into the trains. And I haven't had any issues with our throughput with this setup. We have a lot of junctions to keep the lanes mostly clear, and it's worked really well for getting the ore to where we need to go. Taking a closer look here, we can see in greater detail just how I've laid out the base. This is us in the center here, and just north of that we have our main smelting station, which is composed of 3 each of iron and copper, and then we have stone and stone brick as well as coal just above that, and then 2 steel smelting stations to the very far left. These all spill into a main bus that is this bright yellow color here that you can see takes on this almost figure 8 pattern. To the west and east you can see a couple more superfluous smelting stations which were added on much later for the sole purpose of supplying our 1K per minute science facilities, which we'll get to a little bit later. Moving on from our smelting station, we have 6 green circuit factories that you can see here. The first 4 do mirror each other left to right and feed into our main bus. The other 2 are at diagonals from each other and do feed into the main bus as well, but mostly feed into our research factories. We then have 4 red circuit factories which also dually feed the main bus as well as our research facilities. Same with 4 blue circuit factories here. We then have our combat section, which is to the very bottom left here, which is what supplies our ammo as well as our capsules. We also have a convenient garage over here. And then to the right hand side we have modules just left of our blue circuit factory, and then we have to the very bottom right our rockets, our low density structures, our rocket fuel, and our rocket control units, all in this right hand section here. To the very bottom of the main bus we have our oil section where we process our crude oil in this oblong shape here. Then we have our plastic to the south, our sulfuric acid processing to the right, and then even more south of that we have 2 of these massive nuclear factories. Now taking an even more zoomed in look, we can see just what is in the center of my southern circle here. We have my first science factory, which is 1 science pack per second in the upper half, and then just below that we have factories devoted to construction of our robots as well as accumulators and our solar panels. Now let's go ahead and we'll continue to take a first-person look at the rest of the base. Here we now are taking a closer look at my iron smelting setup. Now as our ore trains come in from the farming stations, the majority of the trains will come in and feed through the stacker here. This can accommodate 2 rows worth of the iron ore trains, and then once there's room they can feed into the 5 train stacker over here, where they then wait their turn to move on to the available train station. There are 11 iron smelting stations in total, which are all connected to this one decider combinator over here. This allows for the opening and closing of certain train stations so that the iron ore train will only go into the station that needs it instead of holding up the line or going into a train station that already has ore in the boxes. That is essentially the purpose of this green arrow. Not only does it tell me whether we have ore coming into the system at a glance, but it is also inversely related to the train station it's next to. When the lights are green or turned on, the train station it's next to should turn off or red if we look at the map here, which these all are. The only reason why I would want the train station to be turned off is so that I could have the ore train end up skipping that station and end up moving past that and onto the train station that actually does need the ore. That allowed me to further divvy up the iron ore coming in so that the train stations down here, for instance, that still had to wait their turn could end up getting ore. The only way I was able to avoid getting a train pathing error was by adding in an extra station over here. This one is for the iron and this one over here for the copper. But what this does is that when we have an input from our signal over here from the decider combinator equaling 11, which is how many stations we have, this train station turns on. The only reason why we don't actually have this coming up here into the angle that we have for the train station is because of this signal here, which prevents it from continuing any further. When C equals greater than 1, which is what this signal is based on, this train signal is turned off. Conveniently, once we have a train station that opens up in this section over here again, the train station will turn off, this signal will turn back on, and then the train can continue moving on to the station that needs it and avoiding all of the ones that are closed. This system is essentially duplicated over here to the copper setup as well, where we have stations that are turned on or off depending on which stations end up needing it. The only stations that I don't have this setup is for our coal and our stone, which are in far less demand than the copper and the iron. There are a couple exceptions to this general setup, however. Looking over here to our western smelters, the iron ore smelters in particular had a little bit of a hard time getting the iron ore they needed, even with the preferential treatment that they got with the priority system. The way I was able to get around that, however, was by putting in a direct line feeding from our main train line that fed past the stackers and directly into the train station itself. This allowed it so that the train station that needed it here still got the iron ore, but still the majority of the trains ended up having to go through our stacker system and getting placed where it needed it. One cool thing about this setup is that we can have our iron and copper trains switch off to either west or east, depending on where it's needed. The lines to do so has the iron branch off going to the east from here, and then the copper feeds from this line here, going down this long line and then back to these copper smelters over here. The iron system does a similar route where it follows this train line and then gets into the iron stations that need it. To fuel our trains, we do use rocket fuel, which is delivered by a single train that picks up and drops off rocket fuel to the main smelting stations of the base. We have a couple along this route here, and here's the train dropping off some stuff as it's needed. And then the passive provider boxes are in the separate logistic networks so that the bots of the smelting station it's next to can pick it up and supply it into the requester boxes over here and then supply it into the train itself. Just north of our smelting area is where we have our uranium ore processing area. This is where we have our trains come into this small stacker here, where it then drops off the ore into a belt that does loop around so that the centrifuges have ample time to pick it up if needed. It looks like we're actually overproducing the uranium-235 at the moment, which is probably related to our Covarex enrichment process. So we've got the excess getting picked up right now by an inserter into a passive provider box. And then this centrifuge here will be also adding in some uranium-238 from the recycled fuel cells. Once the fuel cells are produced, bots supply it into the nuclear reactor facilities I have here. This was the first one I'd ever done before, so I wasn't aware of the nuclear reactor bonus at the time, but I still decided to leave this in just as an extra energy production source, just in case. But the majority of our fuel cells end up getting fed onto the train station that we have here that picks up the fuel cells and then drops it off to our nuclear reactor facilities down at the bottom that we showed at the beginning of the episode. This is a map view of one of those nuclear reactor setups. This one, however, has 16 nuclear reactors that are all bunched together, and in this configuration we actually do end up getting the neighbor bonus, unlike the previous version I made. This is supplied by water in these channels here that get fed into these tanks, but I did originally have a train design that delivered that water through each of these sections here, but I noticed after quite some time that I was having too many train issues and pathing issues, so I ended up getting a water fill mod to allow for the channeled water in its place, and that has worked significantly better than the train delivery setup. Essentially though, our fuel cells are dropped off here to the middle, where we have separate networks of robots that deliver the fuel cells onto the belt here, and then a separate network that delivers the fuel cells into the nuclear reactors themselves. Also looking here, we have a nice setup where we have a speaker system so that if we were to run lower than 16 nuclear fuel cells in the one box, we have this alarm so that we are aware to go solve the problem. This is our other reactor setup. It looks practically identical to the one on the left, except it is mirrored. And this is where we have the fuel cells come in via train and then merge again onto our main train system. Looking at our energy production itself, we're only producing about 1/3 of what we potentially can do, and we're of course meeting 100% of that satisfaction. I've never seen between the two nuclear reactor setups having full production, but I imagine it could probably produce anywhere from 4 to 5 gigawatts with full production plus the nuclear bonus. As we move on from our uranium and smelting sections to more of the core of the base, we have a couple odd belts coming to and from this section here. The reason for that is because we have a couple different logistic networks throughout the base. We have one big logistic network coverage that spans the entire square here and provides construction coverage even further. The very fine line, though, between logistic coverage is this very thin green line you can see here where the logistic coverage is no longer there. So any products that come to or from this area have to be belted in. Moving towards the core of our base, we finally get to where I consider to be the start of the main bus. We have 4 belts each of iron and copper here, as well as several belts of steel, stone, brick, stone, and coal. These all feed into our first circle here, which is where we started, where we have, again, our supply depots and a couple other factories that feed from these belt lines here. The first to do that is probably this green circuit factory that we have here, where we have a couple different branches of iron coming from our smelting section up here that feeds directly into the green circuit factory and surpasses the main bus. And then we have our copper, which is fed all the way from the right-hand side of the bus as well. This factory is able to output 2 full blue belts of green circuits, which then get fed into the start of our green circuit portion of the main bus. Same can be said for the right-hand side as well, but instead of having the direct input of our iron, we directly input copper instead. This also gets fed into a second green circuit factory, again on the right side, same as the left over here. The supply depot where we now are in the left upper quadrant of the base serves to produce mostly more elementary items that are needed. Those things are belts, we also have inserters and assembly machines over here getting produced, as well as some boxes, some robotic bays, and other miscellaneous products. None of these recipes though require any copper, and only a couple of them actually require any red or green circuits, which are then trickled in through the bottom here. Our bottom right quadrant, however, has more advanced technology, where we have more use of our red and green circuits, as well as copper in this section over here. Here we produce more circuit things, more advanced things like engines, and then we also have a couple extra things over here like train stuff. Over here also is where we produce our turrets and things for defense, as well as our radar machines. Back to the center of the base again is where we have the bulk of our storage. We have boxes and boxes lined up along the walls here, with the number one item being stored at the moment being 75,000 empty barrels. And that is a mistake on my part, where for a little while I let our oil and our fluid products kind of go without a cap for some time. I've since then put a cap on our fluid limits, so hopefully we can get rid of these empty barrels. Finally, moving past our first circle here is where we have our first big junction. This is where you can see the main bus lines and how they mirror each other. We have green circuits to the very far edge, as well as red circuits, then one belt in, and then plastic. And then we have a slight change where we have steel to the left side, but then we have coal and then stone products here to the right side. We also have our copper and our iron, of course, but these actually alternate so that iron is on the outer side here, whereas it's on the inner side on this side. And that was done on purpose so that we could have copper feed the majority of our products over here for our supply depot, whereas our left upper quadrant supply depot required mostly just iron. We finally move on to our red circuit production. We have another one just up here as well, which is fed directly from our green circuits up above. And then we finally have the last of our circuit production in these blue circuit factories here. Now at the right side of the factory, we still have a pair of blue circuit factories, but we now have the addition of module factories as well. We have production of our production modules here, our efficiency modules here, and then 2 sets of speed modules, as well as only a section of speed 1 modules in this section here. The reason why I spent so much emphasis on the speed modules was because I knew that they would be required for the rocket control units, which are in a factory just below this line here. I did make sure to put caps on the production of all of our modules. The bulk of our efficiency modules actually go into production of efficiency 1s compared to efficiency 3s because it's actually efficiency 1s that I use in our miners. I do though have about 1,000 of speed 3 and productivity 3 modules in storage at any given time just in case I need to put down a new factory that may require those. So before we move on to our science factories, let's go ahead and we'll start some research so we can see what the factory looks like when on. We've already gotten a lot done in terms of our research though. We have yet to do mining productivity 62, but that is the next step. We've already done worker robot speed 13, which took quite a long time, and then we're already going to be up to follower robot count 11 on the next time. So I think for now we'll go ahead and do the mining productivity. We'll go ahead and start that. So now we can finally move on to our first science factory, which is this one here. It was a blueprint I put down in the early stages of the game that can do 1 science pack per second. I still decided to keep the factory even though it's no longer entirely efficient at this point, but I will accept any and all help towards science that I can get. The name for the creator is linked in the top right hand section, so all credit should go to him for the creation of this blueprint. I did however add on my own blueprint of yellow science. This was a design that I came up with on my own that happens to also put out 1 yellow science pack per second in keeping up with the same ratios. We finally have our labs just below our science factories, and then only 1 set of the labs can be beaconed at this time. Now just to the right of the labs we have a couple assembly machines devoted to producing some odds and ends that are needed mostly for armor and things that go in the armor. So this is where you can find some exoskeletons, the MK armor itself. We also have our rocket silo, which we have here, I think just 1 or 2 in storage in case we wanted to plop down some more, and just some other things like that. Now just below our labs we have where we produce our engines as well as our robotic frames, and then the construction robots to the left and the logistic robots to the right. This has been very efficient and produces things very quickly. We always have at least 300 construction robots and logistic robots in storage at any given time, just in case I need to place down some new farming areas or have a new project to work on. As we move along the perimeter of our second circle here, you'll notice that we have a couple more belts that have been added into our main bus. So we're continuing on with the main belt lines that we had between the iron and the green circuits, which is where we left off with the top circle. But we've now added in a main bus line of our blue circuits here, as well as coal and sulfur to the left. But on the right-hand side of the southern circle, we have a couple different items. We have our low-density structures and then our rocket control units, which instead get fed over the sulfur and the coal. So now that we're on the left-hand side of the base, we'll go ahead and take a look at our garage. My signature that I essentially put on the factory here. Now this garage stores our car and our tank and has a convenient filling setup, which is from someone else's design, which I will go ahead and link down below. But in theory, how it's supposed to work, even though it's a little gimmicky I've noticed, is that you're supposed to drive the car or the tank into this entrance here. The car or tank is then pushed up against the wall and then forced upwards, where it's then stopped until it is filled as much as the quantity will allow it to. Once it's met those requirements, it's then spit out into the garage here, and then you're ready to go. Now this is where we have our regular ammo production as well as piercing, and then our regular shotgun shells as well as piercing shotgun shells. Just below that we have our capsule production. We have 2 sets being produced because it does take so long to produce any of these items and you go through so much at any given time. And then just below that is where we have production of our explosives, our landmines, which actually do surround our perimeter wall, and then our flamethrower ammo, grenades, and then our tank shells and things like that. One thing I like about this section is that at any given point, if I decide I need to go fight some biters or I need to go out on an extended or longer run around the base, I can always come grab my car or I can come grab the supplies I need to prepare myself. We'll go ahead and make our way to our rocket factories now. Looks like we have one ready to launch. Now I won't say that these rocket silos will do 1 rocket per minute or even 2 rockets per minute, but it can do 2 rockets pretty consistently. I do have a cap on how many rockets are launched, however. I make sure that we only have rockets getting launched if we have less than 4,000 of the space science packs at any given time in the network. That way we don't overproduce the rockets or the components that go into the rockets themselves. Even more right of this is where we have our factories for our low density structures and our rocket control units. These are practically identical blueprints of each other. They are a little bit longer than I made originally. At first there were only 24 assembly machines to comprise the entire factories for either low density structures or the rocket control units, but I did add on to that, seeing as how our throughput could manage that. And then finally, to the very right hand side of the base, we have at last our rocket fuel production. Now this I essentially took entirely from Exterminator's rocket fuel design. It's just a little bit smaller, so all credit should go to him for this design. It works very efficiently. I have requested originally just the light fuel to go into the rocket fuel production, but I have begun to request a little bit of the heavy oil since I've had so much extra when it's not getting converted into lube. Oh, and there's our science already done. Let's go ahead and see if we can do a little bit more research to continue watching the factory stay turned on and see how much we can get done by the end of the video. Now finally, having the bulk of our factories explored in the center here, we can move on to our oil refinery sections. We have several trains that stop and come to and from this area. This one here we're standing at is where we have light oil getting picked up to supply the rocket fuel. We have plastic here that's dropped off onto this side and another side for the left hand, which is this one over here. We also have barrels that get picked up and dropped off here, petroleum as well, and then this is where we have things that go out to the perimeter for our defense. So we have our landmines, we have our light fuel that goes into our flamethrower turrets, and then repair packs and things like that that the perimeter should need. Now looking at the bulk of where we actually do our crude oil refinement, this is also another design that I took from Exterminator, so credit goes to either him or one of his peers that happened to design this. It does work very efficiently, and the lights are green, which means we have crude oil coming in, so it is turned on. The refineries themselves may not be turned on though, because I do have limits on how much I want to request of either the light, heavy oil, the petroleum, and then the lube. So I do have caps on that, whereas I didn't have it originally. This is also where we have some more oil barreling and unbarreling and item pickup and drop off. Part of the reason for this to go such a short distance is because we do have separate networks. So this network here is for logistic coverage to solely work in this section, which is why I needed separate train stops to come to or from. As you might have noticed along the way, we have trains that are specifically color-coded for each product, but this pink color here is solely for my own personal use. And to be honest, I've actually never used it, but theoretically this train could take me anywhere I wanted to go on the map in a much quicker fashion than just walking. Finally, moving on to our plastic factory, we have our petroleum gas that is delivered by this train here, and then supplied to our robots to the assembly machines and the chemical plants where it needs to go. Coal is also brought in, and then the product is finally shipped off back to the main system. This is another design by Exterminator, so either him or his friends are also due for credit on this factory. It is very efficient. I do have about 300 logistic robots that do supply the products to and from where they need to go. The main difference though between this factory and Exterminator's original design is that I did build this for only a 242 train instead of a 363, which I believe is what he uses primarily. We can now also move on to the right-hand side of our plastics where we have our sulfuric acid factory. Again, more credit goes to Exterminator for this one as well. I do have this capped off though, which is why we don't see anything getting produced right now, so that I do believe if we have less than 1,000 or 2,000 barrels in the main network, that this will start to run again. But for now, it's been doing a great job getting us exactly what we need. Now zoomed out on our oil and fluid processing area, you can see how extensive our train section is here. We have so many trains coming and going and so many alternating paths and different junctions. It took me quite a while to figure out how to get these train signaling sections to work, but I was able to figure it out in the end. What I did figure out though was that for the trains that needed to go back onto the main train network, they can do so here so that they can go and deliver things where they need to go. And then we can also have another set of trains come back into this train and oil fluid section through these stackers here if need be. For the last stop of our tour, we'll finally take a look at our 1K per minute science factories. We have a couple spread out throughout the base, but before we move on to that, you can see that this is what our factory looks like when on and in motion. We don't always have 100% throughput of all of our products or 100% coverage of the products on the belts at any given time, but it still works pretty darn efficiently. We're already almost through mining productivity 63 again. So we'll start by taking a look at the left-hand side where we have our science factories on that section. We're starting now with the yellow science factory section of the base. This is essentially 4 smaller yellow science factories stacked on top of each other, which when done so can produce up to 1,000 yellow science packs per minute. We've already got our belts saturated. Our throughput problem though lies probably with our red circuits, which don't always quite make it towards the end at the top here. Still though, we're definitely meeting our yellow science needs at the moment. Just above this is our battery factory, which solely goes into supplying our yellow science factory. Here is where our superfluous smelters come in handy. These ones on the side, as you can see here, go in to supply our science factories themselves. And then the belts here also supply the green science factory that we have below that. Just above the batteries is where we have more science factories. Again, these are supplied also from our superfluous smelting factories over here to the left. But this section also consists of a couple different sciences. It has one section here for red. We have another 4 purple factories stacked on top of each other for the purple. And that produces also another 1,000 purple science per minute. And then we have one longer factory for the green science. Moving on to the right-hand side again, we finally have our blue science and our military science just below that. Instead of having stacks of 4 though, the blue science to create 1,000 science packs per minute has to have 5 of these individual stacks on top of each other. It is very iron heavy, which is why we have yet again another set of iron smelters over here to the right. And then we again have some more copper smelters over here to the right as well, just below the iron. And then at last we have our military science packs here to the left, which takes 4 of the smaller military science stacked on top of each other to equal the 1,000. Well everyone, we've made it back to where we started, and it looks like our science is just about to wrap up getting researched. So with that, I appreciate you all for joining me so much, and I hope you think this space is as beautiful as I do. As always, thank you for checking out the video and giving me your support. And if you would like to see how this base was created from start to finish, you can go ahead and check out the links and the videos below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you for the next one.